Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. This episode is the UFC 269 post-fight reaction show, recapping everything that went down during last night's fights. UFC 269, an awesome event, an event that I would categorize as a feel-good night of fights. The good guys all showed up. The good guys all showed out. If there was a good guy, and maybe not necessarily a bad guy, but a guy that paved the way or paved his way to success in the sport, those guys got it done. Those girls got it done. In particular, one woman got it done. Juliana Pena getting it done in what was one of the most stunning upsets in UFC history. And I have a hot take on that performance from one Juliana Pena right here, right now on this show. Before I dive in to all the action from UFC 269, folks, you can follow me and the podcast, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, on YouTube, as well as Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Anywhere you find your podcasts, search the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You will find it. You'll be able to tune in to any and all episodes that I have, whether it's Buffalo Bills pregame and postgame reactions, whether it is NFL talk, discussion on all the big topics surrounding the league, or shows like this, my UFC 269 post-fight reaction shows or pre-fight discussions where I preview, predict, as I like to call it, the big fights from a big UFC event. This was a big UFC event. UFC 269, it's a bookend event to 2021, and it provided a lot of really awesome moments in the sport's history. And I want to start off the show today by recapping Sugar Sean O'Malley's performance last night. Sugar Sean O'Malley, once again, Sugar Sean O'Malley shines on the big stage of UFC 269, a massive event. Sugar Sean O'Malley on the docket once again. And Sugar Sean O'Malley gets a ton of flack for the opponents that he decides to take on. Sugar Sean O'Malley is the type of fighter that I think is actually approaching this the right way. There was a very interesting quote from Sean O'Malley in the UFC post-fight reaction, podcast or post-fight interviews where the fighters fresh off the fight, they get checked by the doctors. The doctors say, "Hey, how you feeling?" They do the eye test and all that stuff, do the neurological tests and all that stuff, and then they're headed right to the media row, where they are asked questions and answer the questions as best as they can to the best of their ability, trying to get that tunnel vision out of the way. It's very tough if you've been in a fight setting or a wrestling match setting to remember or recall what had just happened. And Sugar Sean O'Malley, did as good a job as I've ever seen a fighter do as far as answering the questions from the media in regards to his performance last night. And I think he's approached this as a business. As a matter of fact, that the direct quote was, "A lot of fighters are in the fight game. I'm in the fight business." O'Malley's approaching this sport in a way that I haven't seen anyone approach it before. Stepping in there against some of the fighters that he's fought, I can't really rattle off the names. As a matter of fact, I can't even enunciate the name of the fighter that he fought last night. Case in point, within that concept, I can't even rattle off the name of the fighter they named or that he fought last night. That just goes to show you, I can't pronounce it. That goes to show you I've never really watched that fighter fight, and if I have, it was on a small scene. Maybe Dana White Contender Series. He's fought a few guys from that circuit. He's fought a few guys that have barely really stepped their toes, so to speak, into the UFC waters. But Sean O'Malley is impressive. He's impressive. He is a true fighter. I do believe in his skill set, and in the sense that it is a rare skill set. He's elusive, he's rangy, he's long, and he's light on his feet at that weight class, of course, the bantamweight division. And he is now second in UFC bantamweight history in terms of finishes. So the fact that O'Malley has been this impressive, this quick, has been something that I think it's not being taken into consideration nearly enough. Maybe the UFC has put the PR machine behind him a little bit too much too soon, and it's turned fans off as to how they should react to Sean O'Malley and how they should believe in his skill set, or whether they should or shouldn't believe in his skill set. But I'm here to tell you, as a longtime fan of the sport, as a longtime viewer of the sport, I've seen a lot of fighters come and go that proved ultimately that they were not legitimate, not as legitimate as the UFC promoted them to be. And it was a little bit of a case of too much too soon with some of these fighters. And I think the UFC and Sean O'Malley are actually approaching this the right way, building his record, building his name, building his star, as Sean O'Malley said, and building it towards something spectacular. I think it'll do the UFC better business, it'll do Sean O'Malley better business, and it'll ultimately provide the result that the fans of Sean O'Malley expect, that one day Sean O'Malley will be a name that people remember in the sport. Now, I'm not saying he will be that, but what I'm saying is it will provide the thought that he could be that if they continue this path. And whether they do or not, we'll see. But I think it's safe to say that they are and that they will. So Sean O'Malley, credit to him, props to him, a great performance from him. I really liked what I saw last night from him. Actually, I liked what I saw more post-fight than I did during the fight or pre-fight. You know, what turns me off to O'Malley is these call-outs of fighters that he's not even fighting, facing off literally against Cody Garbrandt during a press conference when him and Garbrandt weren't even fighting. Things like that. It's like, young gun. We know you're a young gun. We know that you're a young stud, but you still got a little ways to go. You still got just that little bit, and then you can, act that way and conduct yourself in that form and fashion, but not yet. A little too soon, Junior. You know what I mean? It's just a little too soon, a little cringy. As he builds these wins, though, I think that will be earned to entertain in that form and fashion. So that's my thoughts on Sugar Sean O'Malley. It'll be interesting to see who the next opponent is for him. It'll be very interesting to see who, or I should say, where Sean O'Malley is ranked beyond this fight. Next fight was Dominick Cruz. Dominick Cruz turned back the clock. Cruz turns back the clock against Pedro Munoz, and it wasn't for the faint of heart. I mean, the first round, Dominick Cruz was dropped. Dominick Cruz was badly hurt. He was dropped multiple times against Pedro Munoz, and yet Cruz got back on the bike, did what he does best. He circled, he used his footwork, he used his speed and agility and elusiveness to avoid these strikes of Pedro Munoz. And it was clear to me from the opening bell that obviously I knew Cruz was more elusive, but the stance and style of Pedro Munoz and how he approached this fight couldn't be more wrong. Very rigid, very stiff, very classic in terms of his boxing orthodox stance. As an MMA striker, Cruz has fought those guys a dime a dozen. The Uriah Fabers, the Uriah Fabers. Who else? Who else am I drawing blanks on? Even the Garbrandts. He's fought those guys that have that just straight up, I'm here, throwing here, throwing here. Munoz fighting like that, it was not going to be successful for him. I thought Pedro Munoz would actually show a little bit more of a change of pace and style, so to speak, than what we are normally accustomed to. But he didn't. And I think that was much to his detriment. And at 36 years old, Dominick Cruz, getting this decision win, it was a 29-28 decision on the scorecards. It is just so crazy to me, the career that Dominick Cruz has had. I go back and I look at, the WEC fights. I go back and look at the long, title reign that he had in the UFC that was filled with just injury stories at one after another. He's the king of the comeback. He really is. Dominick Cruz is the king of the comeback. To have these injuries that he's had over the course of his career, to come back continuously each and every time, it's truly phenomenal. It goes back to the performance against TJ Dillashaw back in January of 2016. It was his first fight in almost 2 years. It's a title shot. It's an opportunity that he gets against Dillashaw when there really weren't that many names in the division. Cruz was one of those names. He wins that title on a unanimous decision, then goes to defend his title against his rival Uriah Faber in the third fight. Then you go back to December of 2016, 5 years ago. December 2016, Cruz is going up against Cody Garbrandt, who I'm going to talk about in the show today. Cruz goes up against Cody Garbrandt, and Garbrandt just completely Dominic Cruz. And Cruz loses his title. He kind of fades into obscurity after not fighting for almost 4 years after that point to get another title shot against Henry Cejudo and come up short on that. Gets a split decision win over Casey Kenny and gets a decision win last night against Pedro Munoz. It's coming off of 2 losses in a span of 4 years. Dominic Cruz has now won 2 straight fights since March. We're talking about a completely different Dominic Cruz now. We're talking about an active bantamweight that is climbing the ranks. Who would have thought that Dominic Cruz would be at this phase of his career where he would be climbing the ranks of the UFC bantamweight division? But he is, and he's actually doing it. It's incredible, and credit to him for the performance that he put out last night. I greatly enjoyed it as I adjust my headphones there that I don't need for the show today. I really enjoyed watching him fight last night. It was a turn back of the clock. He went through some adversity, and you know that was great to see. Great to see him battle the way that he did. So and being being a fan of the sport that I have been for so long, you know, to see guys like that get victories, it's truly it's great. It's truly great. I just greatly enjoy seeing, you know, fighters like him continue to get it done. And I think that that's a huge thing for the sport when you are able to see older fighters that have been around a long time continue to perform at a high level. I greatly enjoy it. So next up, I wanted to touch on Cody Garbrandt suffering another KO loss versus Kai Kara France in Garbrandt's UFC flyweight debut. I questioned this decision from Cody Garbrandt and his fight team. I questioned why Garbrandt was moving from 135 to 125 when Garbrandt is known to have some problems eating a punch at the bantamweight division. When Garbrandt is known to be hurt easily in these fights, dropping down in weight actually puts him at a more increased risk to get knocked out and to suffer another knockout loss due to dropping that 10 pounds and due to suffering from a lack of oxygen of a more of a weight cut than what he originally had at 135. I thought Cody looked great at 135, and some of his last few performances, there were, you know, not wins, but they were performances that proved he belonged at 135. I thought that was the right weight class, and to move down, I just didn't really quite understand it. And now you move down a weight class, you suffer a knockout loss, but not just a knockout loss, it's a first round knockout loss. And I don't know what's next for Cody Garbrandt. I think that's the biggest question of the night is what's next for Cody Garbrandt. I've rarely ever been on this show, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, and discussed what is next for a fighter and literally called for them to be done. But 4 knockouts, 4 knockout losses in your last 5 fights. You're 30 years old. It's an early time to call it a career for Cody Garbrandt. It really is. But 4 knockouts in your last 5 fights, you definitely don't belong in the upper echelon of the biggest company, the best company, the NFL of mixed martial arts that is the UFC, with 4 knockout losses in your last 5 fights. Fighters prior to Cody Garbrandt have been cut for a worse effort, for a worse result, I should say. It's not for a lack of effort. Cody Garbrandt's stepping in there, throwing punches. He's just getting hurt, badly hurt by the majority of his opponents. And this goes to show you, you know, I touched on Dominic Cruz and the title loss that he suffered to Garbrandt. No man could have went in there with Cody Garbrandt that night and beaten him. That version of Cody Garbrandt was one of the most dominant displays. At the time, I remember being on the show and saying that it was one of the best performances from a challenger to a champion that I have ever seen. And what has become of Cody Garbrandt's career? 2 straight losses to TJ Dillashaw, a loss to Pedro Munoz, a loss to Rob Font, moving down a weight class to reset his career and provide that UFC flyweight division with a new, fresh challenger. The new, fresh challenger is Kai Kara France. I don't know if Kai Kara France is going to get the title shot coming off of this win, but he made a case that he belongs in the conversation with a win over Cody Garbrandt. As well, we have a story that I am just so excited to discuss on the show today. And this is a story that anytime you're talking about combat sports, there's one night, there's one fight, I should say, that really takes the story of the night to the next level. We had a performance by Jeff Neal and Santiago Ponzinibbio. It was a win for Jeff Neal. It was a split decision. Realistically, that was probably the worst fight of the night. It wasn't really entertaining, and it was a split decision. So even the judges couldn't really figure out who set themselves apart as far as winning that one. So I'm not really going to give that one too much time, but I will give this one a lot of time. And it is Juliana Pena's upset victory over Amanda Nunes. And this is not just one of the biggest upsets in mixed martial arts history. It is the greatest upset in women's MMA history, period. The greatest upset in the history of women's mixed martial arts. A lot of people will kind of scoff at that and say, really, you think that this was a bigger upset than Holly Holm against Ronda Rousey? Yeah, I do. Big time. Holly Holm was a world kickboxing champion. She's being inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame. Juliana Pena has been relatively inactive over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. And she's sprinkled in victories here and there, but over the last 4 or 5 years, she's called for this fight. She's demanded that she was the woman to beat Amanda Nunes. And nobody believed her, except those that were, working closely with her, training closely with her, that knew her skill set. And she willed her way to victory last night. She willed it into existence. She manifested her own destiny. It sounds corny, but that's literally what happened. The first round was not an easy round for Juliana Pena. You come off of that round and you think, okay, Amanda Nunes might just ragdoll her all night long. But then Juliana Pena started to throw these stinging lefts and rights with just pure precision. They weren't the hardest punches, but they added up. You land a punch over and over again, they add up. And they added up last night for Juliana Pena. It wasn't so much the power. It was the aggressiveness. It was the volume. It was the pace. It was the energy, the will to push forward. Everything that Amanda Nunes threw, it didn't necessarily land as well because Pena was just right on top of her in that second round. She was right in her face, just pushing her back. Pena moving forward constantly. It was beautiful. The Venezuela vixen, Juliana Pena, the new UFC women's bantamweight title holder. And I got to say, in terms of, what's next for her, obviously the rematch for Pena and Nunes is a big, big fight. But I asked myself the question, does Amanda Nunes want the rematch? And that's a question that I think I didn't put in the tagline here, but always add it. Does Amanda Nunes want the rematch? It appeared to me after the fight was over that Nunes just kind of thought to herself, I lost. It is what it is. It's almost like she's fought all this time, won all these fights, to just say to herself, at first glance of a loss, I might be done. That might be it. And what a massive opportunity for the UFC if Nunes had won last night to book Amanda Nunes versus Kayla Harrison. I think that fight could still potentially happen. I don't see why it shouldn't happen, but it's definitely a tougher sell after Nunes was just stopped. I think Nunes would have to fight Pena again, beat her, and then we'd be back to square one with Nunes then fighting Harrison. But it's a lot of time in between now and then, I should say. And that time now and then is time that the UFC just doesn't have. The business has to move on. The business has to be moving. That was a fight that was on right there, right on a silver platter for Amanda Nunes with a win over Pena, and now she is on a detour in her career. And it's a detour that I don't know if she wants to take this route. I don't know if she feels it's worthy of her effort, because frankly, she could retire today and everyone would say she's still the greatest women's fighter in MMA history, and you wouldn't be wrong. But this was a stumble. This was a roadblock that was awaiting her for years, ultimately. Juliana Pena was right. Juliana Pena believed that she could pull off one of the greatest upsets in UFC history, and in my opinion, the greatest upset in women's MMA history. And, I say greatest upset in women's MMA history, ranking it ahead of Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, because we all knew that Ronda had no stand-up. It didn't exist. That was not in her arsenal. She was a judo practitioner, an Olympian judo practitioner, and Holly Holm is one of the best strikers that the sport's seen in quite a long time, and Amanda Nunes knocked her out with a head kick. She knocked Holly Holm out with a head kick, the champion kickboxer. So what she's done in this sport, what Amanda Nunes has done in this sport is legendary. I feel torn for her because I feel like she might want this fight. She might not want this fight. She's going to be debating that, mulling that over. Whether this fight happens or not, that's the biggest question in the bantamweight division, women's bantamweight division. Juliana Pena, though, she deserves a championship tour. I expect her to be on media shows for days, for weeks on end, months on end. She deserves it. Congratulations to Juliana Pena for getting it done. It was a great performance from her. Greatly enjoyed it. And I truly feel that what's ahead for her is a ton of positive things, tons of opportunity, whether it's in the sport or outside of the sport. I'm very excited for that. So on to the main event of the evening. Charles Dubronx Oliveira gets it done against Dustin Poirier. He retains the UFC lightweight title. And truthfully, I couldn't be happier for the result of the fight. And it's in the sense that, not that I was rooting for or against either one of these guys, but the result of the fight, what transpired within the fight, was so damn entertaining. That first round was one of the best rounds I've seen from a just pure fighting, pure mixed martial arts standpoint in quite some time. The pace of both men was captivating. That first round was electric. That first round was unlike anything I've seen, as I said, in recent memory. And it takes two to tango. Poirier was ready. Oliveira was ready. But much like his fight against Michael Chandler, Charles Oliveira made a massive adjustment from the first round to the second round. First round, he's coming out. He's pretty slow paced. Didn't really have that sense of urgency. Kind of was staying patient within the fight. And truthfully, I feel that that's who Charles Oliveira is. He takes this first round not off, essentially, but he does have a labored approach in the first round to kind of download the data, go into the second round, and make that fight his fight. In the second round, we saw Oliveira completely dominate the action. And then the third round, we saw Oliveira go back to the well of the ground game, climb atop Poirier's back and sink in that choke. And folks, it's real tough to lose a title fight in any point in your career, but to lose two title fights, knowing that you've climbed the ladder after a title fight loss, you beat Conor McGregor once, twice. Realistically, I think you beat him three times, Dustin Poirier, against Conor. If they were to fight again, I think Poirier would get it done easily. But for Poirier, that's got to be a real tough loss. It had to have stung. It's probably stinging right now. And I think Charles Oliveira, though, I mean, he is the rightful champion. He is the well-deserved champion. He is the true champion. I had a lot of people reading comments. I was reading comments on social media, tweets saying that, that Charles Oliveira was not up to snuff, was not tough enough, didn't have the heart. All bull crap. Charles Oliveira definitely belonged in there. Charles Oliveira is the man, and I think this is a great era for the UFC lightweight division. He's the Charles Oliveira is the deserving champ, and I'm very excited to see who's next for him. I think that's going to be Justin Gaethje. If I was a betting man, I'd probably say Justin Gaethje, but we'll see. Crazier things have happened. Who's to say they put Gaethje in there and then Gaethje gets hurt and then it's Islam Makhachev's opportunity? We'll see. Time will kind of answer that question for us. But to Dominic Cruz's point, post-fight, let's live in the now. Let's just appreciate the fact that Charles Oliveira is a great ambassador for the sport. He is the king of the UFC's toughest division, the Shark Tank that is the UFC lightweight division. And I can't wait to see what's next for him. I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the UFC 269 post-fight reaction show right here on Facebook and YouTube. You can follow and subscribe to the show, of course, on YouTube, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. You can like the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Facebook. Follow me along on Twitter, too, at Ryan Thomas Take, as well as on Instagram, the same handle, at Ryan Thomas Take. You guys take care. Enjoy today's games. I know I got a preview show to preview the Buffalo Bills battle with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Stay tuned for more.